This video is all about off-camera flash for beginners. If you know how to use your flash gun, then you're pretty much hitting the ground running with this video. If not, I'd recommend watching part 1 just so that you know the ins and outs of your flash guns before we complicate matters and add more in. So, what is the purpose of off-camera flash? It's a very portable, affordable option to get superb creative light in wherever you are, indoors or out. I've used it loads over the years for baby shoots, styled shoots, weddings, fun. There's loads that you can do with it and I love it. So your off-camera flash setup for portraits generally is your flash gun on a light stand. If it's a key light, it will be at a 45-degree angle. And again, using the sort of angling techniques that we did in the first video, you don't want it pointing directly at your subject because that's not pleasing. So you either want it sort of slightly angled up or shot through an umbrella or other diffusion, which I'll cover in a little bit. So how do we get started? There are a few ways to do this and they all have pros and cons, so I'll go through it. If your camera has a pop-up flash, you can use that as a trigger to remotely set off one or more flash guns. The way that you do this is put your flash gun in slave mode and they'll all have like a little receiver bit and you make sure that that's pointing in the right direction to receive the signal, and then anytime there's a flash, that flash gun will trigger. This is the most basic way of doing it, and you do have a certain degree of control when you do it this way, but there are a few cons. For instance, if your subject is quite close, your pop-up flash, this is pop-up flash by the way, your pop-up flash could interfere with the exposure of your image. 2, it's not always the most reliable way to trigger your slave flash gun because it might not pick up the signal for whatever reason. And 3, the reason that I'm totally against it is to turn the flash gun off or change the settings, you have to walk all the way over to it, take it down off the light stand and physically mess with it and put it back up. So it's more time consuming and there's a lot more trial and error involved. So while you can do it with the slave mode, I would recommend other options, and don't worry, they are affordable. The next way that you can trigger your flash guns is to use triggers and receivers. It's a specific product that you can buy and you put your transmitter on top of your camera and then put the receiver on any and all of your flash guns. Now this ups your control quite a bit. You can have them, the ones I used to have, they used to be like sort of A, B, C, D on the transmitter, and then you could turn the flash guns on and off from your camera. If you do want to change your intensity of your flash gun, you do have to go over, take it down, change it, put it back up and have a bit of trial and error. But it does give you more reliability and creative control over what's going on compared to slave mode. The third mode and the best mode, and the mode that I now use, is having flash guns that have built-in receivers and come with a transmitter. This little box sits on top of your hotshoe on your camera, and from here you can turn on and off your individual flash guns and, more importantly, change the settings of them from your camera. So if you take a shot and the flash gun's too bright, you can just up it from the little screen without having to take it down and mess with it. So in terms of reliability, creative control and ease of use, these are the best option and the ones I would recommend for days. So how do we get the correct exposure with off-camera flash? This is very similar to your on-camera flash, but it's a little bit more complicated because there might be more lights in play. The most important thing to do first is figure out what you want outside of your subject to look like, because the flash guns will only illuminate your subject, or if you're shooting at a wall or whatever, they will only illuminate so much. So for instance, if you're out and about and you want to get the sky looking really moody, you dial in your manual settings without flash to get the sky looking exactly how you want it. Because if you start with the flash gun first, things just get complicated. Get your base exposure right first. Without the flash, of course, your subject will probably be in darkness, but the flash gun will fix that when you add it in. So you expose for the sky, expose for the background. If you want behind them to be in pitch black, expose for that. And make sure before anything gets complicated, you have your base exposure right. So once you have your base exposure and everything's looking nice outside of your subject, add your flash guns in one by one. If you only have one, There's only one more step to take. Turn it on and see what we're doing. You really want to get the exposure of the flash gun in off-camera flash with the power on the flash gun, because if you start messing with your exposure on the camera, you'll blow out your sky and you'll ruin your base exposure. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I've said exposure 100 times. Sorry. So leave your settings as they are on the camera, and if it's too bright, knock it down a stop or two on the flash gun. If you have those handy dandy triggers I was talking about, you can do it on camera. If not, you're taking your light stand down and then putting it back up. So you can see how handy the triggers are that have all of your information on remotely. Things only get more complicated if you add more flash guns in. So this is my Strobist setup. We have the key light here, we have the flashlight behind us, and the idea is to get the bride and groom in front of it and make magic happen. That's my scientific theory. Now, with this, I recommend adding them one at a time. Don't just turn all the flash guns on at once, because you don't know what light source is causing what to happen in the scene. You need to isolate them all. Start with none, add one, add two, add three. That way you can control and get each aspect of the scene right before you move on to the next bit. So that is how we expose. How do we go about composing our image with off-camera flash? First of all, if you're learning, and also if you're a bit run and gun, one flash is superb. You can use one flash to do loads. There are a few different methods to get the most out of one flash. If you are shooting outside, you can use the sun as a hair light and use your flash gun to fill in, as we did in the previous video. That is a fantastic technique that I've used loads. You get loads of detail in the sky and it looks brilliant. If you want to sort of disregard the sun and just use one flash gun to light your scene, you can use it at a 45-degree angle and just shoot away, and you'll get some really good results. Another way to use one flash gun creatively is to use it as your backlight, which casts your subject into a silhouette with a long shadow on the floor. And that's really good fun to play with. Good at night, obviously. And another way that I've used one flash gun is sort of creatively, abstractly. I stuck it in the top of a diffusion umbrella and used it to light this really weird abstract scene, and I really enjoyed the results. The great thing about flash guns is they are small and you can get them in places that you wouldn't normally be able to get lights, so you can have a lot of fun with them if you use your imagination. Before I move on to sort of more complex off-camera flash techniques where you have two lights or more, diffusion. You can use umbrellas. I have a lot of the white umbrellas, which are my favourite, though do beware, in sort of windy conditions they will turn into a sail and smash your flash gun to bits, which I've done also quite regularly. Another reason to buy cheaper flash guns. You can also use silver umbrellas, and the way that you set those up is, instead of pointing the flash gun at the subject, you point the flash gun at the inside of the silver and then the reflected light comes out. And you can also buy softboxes as well. There's all different kinds of diffusion that you can use, and most of the time, if you want pleasing soft light, I do recommend using diffusion. However, if you're doing like a power pose with a man, or it's sports or something a little bit more rugged, the harsh light without diffusion can also be really effective. So try both and see what looks best for the look you're wanting to achieve. Let's move on to two flash guns. There's a couple of setups that you can use for this. You could generally have your key light and have one behind you as a hair light, which isn't dissimilar to what I have now, but with like studio lights. With your hair light, you know, like with the key light, you don't want it facing at the subject. With the ones on the back, do that, angle it. You can modify it to make it even more directional with different products as well. Or if you're a cheapskate like me, you can wrap, I have actually done this, but not for a job. You can wrap a bit of cardboard around your flash gun to make it more like a funnel, and it can create a spotlight behind you, or it will hit your subject very, very precisely without any spill. So you can modify them and angle them as much as you want, because that light behind the subject isn't supposed to be pleasing, it's supposed to be for an effect. So the light behind them can hit them from behind and create a little hair light, like we have here. You can angle it backwards and illuminate a wall, which I have done many times. And both of those really help isolate your subject and pull them out from the background. And that's really important creatively, because sometimes with one light, your subject can sort of stick to the background and there's not much separation and it doesn't look as good. So if you have one light, I'd recommend using the sun as your backlight if you're outdoors. If you are indoors, 2 lights will give you the best results. Another thing that you can do with just 2 flash guns is illuminate a white backdrop. I've done this loads for family shoots. You can get sort of a cloth or a paper white backdrop, stick a flash gun behind it, and then it will blow out the white backdrop and make it look super cool. Top tip for that, it might be your instinct to stick the flash gun as close to the background as possible, but that's not the way to do it. It sounds counterintuitive, but move the flash gun as far away as possible from the backdrop, and then it will spread out the light and blow it all out evenly. Took me a while to figure that one out. Another way to use 2 flash guns, which I use all the time for first dances, is to use the flares that the light will create creatively and keep them in the shot deliberately. So you'll have one key light, it could either be on camera or on a stand, and then behind them, flare one of the lights in the frame. That will work really, really cool, and I love the results that you can get from that. Top tip with that, how big and unwieldy the flares are is directly due to your aperture. So if you want a tiny little star-shaped flare, stop right down to like f16. If you want a big bonkers one that goes on for days, open up your aperture. Now you can go up to 3 lights, or you know, infinite lights. I'm not gonna hold you back, go wild. 3 lights can be a little bit more time consuming to set up because you have to isolate them all one by one and figure out how it's affecting the scene. But it's the exact same principle. Your base settings get right, then add everything in. The way that you would do this is the traditional sort of 3-point lighting, which is your hair light, your key light, and your fill light. So that way you'll have sort of a brighter side of the subject and a slightly darker side of the subject. The way that you would do that is either have the fill light stand further away from the subject or just turn it down. At the end of the day, there are many, many combinations that you can use with any number of flash guns. All that is limited to is your experience and confidence and creativity. So once you've nailed one flash gun, add another. Once you've nailed 2, try 3, go wild. So there we go. On camera in the other video and off camera flash covered for beginners. I hope you understood everything I was trying to say. It can sound more complicated than it is, honestly. As long as you know that the flash gun only really has intensity and sort of a wider or more narrow beam of light, it's very easy to wrap your head around. I will link below the flash gun and remote trigger setup that I use. It's super affordable, and I've got all of the results that you see in this video with that setup. I love the Yongnuos. There are other brands available that do the same thing, but I've had the Yongnuos since 2012, and I think I had the Mark IIs and then the Mark IIIs and then the Mark IVs, and I've only ever thrown them out when they've died on me after using them like 100,000 times, because I used flash so much when I was a family photographer. It was going into people's houses, setting up my little backdrop, setting up my flash guns, and I made a really good living doing that off the back of this lighting. It's so good. Once you master flash photography, if it's raining at a wedding, you're sorted. If you want to get creative, you're sorted. If you want to do an impromptu photo shoot at a party, which I did more than I should have done in the past, my friends are very, very supportive and accommodating. The world is your oyster. You can take portable lights with you wherever you go and make magic happen. If you have any questions at all, let me know, and thank you so much for watching.